Welcome back to another edition of Gen CFB. I am Jessica Smetana, and I'm here today with our fill-in host / guest, Mike Golic Jr., filling in for Lucy Rodine because Lucy, she's out in LA living her best life. She went to the Rose Bowl this weekend. Gojo was there. We're going to do a little Rose Bowl recap, talk about the playoffs, talk about some of the bowl games so far and how amazing bowl season is, because Mike and I are both in agreement, right, Mike? It's the best time of the year, and sadly, it has now come to a close. We'll also do a little national championship preview, I think, if we have time at the end. We never do, because we only have 25 minutes. So here we go, Gojo. Welcome on the show. How was the Rose Bowl?
It was awesome, and it was really cool to get to experience it with Lucy, because it was also the morning that Iowa was playing that game against Tennessee, and I believe the Citrus Bowl.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. And watching her, it was a nice reminder that every fan base and a lot of fans, we're all basically the same when we're watching our team, which is mildly unhinged. We all kind of hate our own team because they've made us miserable at so many different junctures. And when the game is over, it's actually the most liberating moment of all time. So getting to watch her go through that, and then to get to go over and see what is objectively, like, I understand the Rose Bowl committee can be a little pretentious sometimes about things.
No.
It is a ridiculously beautiful setting. I've been there twice now this year, and it lives up to every bit of the hype. So it was awesome.
So my hot take on the Rose Bowl this year, sunset wasn't that great. Not enough clouds in the sky. It was a little too clear. I didn't get enough gradient. How was it in person?
It was, so I didn't stay for the game in person. I went out there for the morning and just kind of bopped around, and then went home and watched the game on my couch, which the worst part about that was I left right before the game was getting ready. I was going to get home right around kickoff. And as I got to the parking garage where I parked, I heard the stealth bomber go overhead. And I just missed seeing it in person, which I was pissed about, because that flyover and the picture they take from the blimp over the stealth bomber over the stadium is the coolest college football picture every year.
You did what a lot of college football fans do and students do at universities with teams that aren't maybe the best during the game. You went to the tailgate, and then you went home and watched it on the couch. And I respect that. That's a great move. Veteran move.
Jess, that was the number one bit of learning I had to do when I was done playing. I went back for my first Notre Dame tailgate after I was done, and it was a night game. And I remember looking around at my friends and my like old roommates in the parking lot, and I'm like, I see why you guys always left at halftime now. I'm exhausted.
What? Your friends left at halftime at Notre Dame? I never did that. If I had to take a nap, I'd do it right there in the stands.
Wow, you know what? And that's why we are friends now, and that's why I'm not on a podcast with a bunch of my friends, ignoring the fact that none of them work in this industry. It's just because you were more dedicated than them, and I appreciate that.
It just means more. Taylor, I need you to tell us what the scene was for the Citrus Bowl viewing party that you and Lucy had before the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, so we get to Pasadena. We're like, let's go as close to the stadium as possible. So traffic was going to be bad. And Gojo's underselling it a bit, how sad the scene was. We're going bar to bar, and nobody will put the Iowa game on for Lucy. They're watching the Oregon game, and then they're watching the Rose Bowl parade, and it's like, hey, guy, the parade is happening right outside. Like, you don't need to put this parade on TV. And then we finally went to a bar that had the game on, but it was at capacity. They wouldn't let us in, so we're just peering in from, like, behind bushes trying to watch this game. And finally, Gojo shows up, and there's an empty table, even though they said they're at capacity, and Gojo's like, we're sitting here. And that's how he watched the game. And that's when I had the thought, I would rather not watch college football. And I love college football. I would rather not watch college football than be an Iowa football fan.
Ooh, that's bleak coming from Taylor, who also told me that his main takeaway from the Rose Bowl was, North Carolina's never going to play in this game.
No.
A very sad realization.
But that's kind of the reality for a lot of college football fans. You know, some teams, you're not going to make it to the playoff. You're not going to, although everyone I think thinks they're going to make it into the 12-team playoff next year, which we'll get to that. But
I do think that's also one of the toughest parts about this current national championship we have is I saw everyone writing about how there's not as many stars in these games. That Alabama team was so full of stars. It makes it feel more accessible now because Washington is not one of the blue chip ratio teams and Michigan's a little farther down in that list. And so now we're all like, wait, what is my team doing wrong if it shouldn't be this hard?
That's true. That's actually a great point. And I think you can point to the tremendous coaching jobs that both Jim Harbaugh and Kalen DeBoer have done without those top 5-star guys. Like, The Rose Bowl, let's talk about the game a little bit. Like, that was really unexpected, I think. I watched Michigan play this whole year. I watched Alabama play this whole year, and I still, even despite Alabama's struggles with their offensive line and at times with Jalen Milroe and at certain times with their defense, I just did not expect Michigan to win on the line of scrimmage the way that they did. So I want your O-lineman take on that, and I would also like your O-lineman take on the snap problems that Alabama had all season that kind of came back in the worst possible moment in this game.
That's a nightmare. Like, anyone who's ever snapped a football at any level will tell you that we all get like secondhand hives watching another center go through the yips like that, because you spend so much time in practice. Like, at the beginning of every day, it was the first thing we would do. Quarterbacks and centers go out early and you go for Q center exchange. You go around with each of the quarterbacks, you get snaps with them under center and shotgun, you go through the cadence, and you try and make every part of that process committed to memory. You want it to be muscle memory. You don't want to have to think about that, because when you get up to the line, you got to think about, all right, what front do we have? Where am I supposed to block on this play? How am I going to reach a 365-pound defensive tackle? All these other things. So you got to have that thing down cold. And the minute there's a mistake, and now all of a sudden you got to think, because think about it as a center too. You don't see it. It's not like a quarterback where, oh, I throw a bad pass and I know right away and I can start to auto-correct in my brain. As a center, you're throwing behind you. You're throwing blind, essentially. And so when you come back up and all of a sudden the quarterback's running around the ground because the ball's done, there's an extra level of panic that goes with that, that if you're not like the most elite, and I've seen all pro NFL guys lose it over that. It's a tremendously unnerving thing. So as soon as I saw that, it certainly had been a case all season, but it wasn't going to stop that day after the first time it happened. I felt really bad for that dude.
Yeah, that was brutal. Now, reports that he's in the portal, leaving Alabama. A bunch of Alabama players went in the portal after the game. Kind of to be expected that there'd be some of that. But that's kind of just college football these days. But a lot was made of the final play, the fourth down play in overtime, and whether or not it was supposed to be a Jalen Milroe run up the gut after almost fumbling another low snap. I don't think that was what was supposed to happen there. But I thought one of the key moments in the game, this is not like a groundbreaking take here. The key moment in the game was the 4th and 2 that Michigan converted on that final drive. Watching Alabama's defense break, like it was like very bend, don't break. J.J. McCarthy was having a good game. Blake Corum was having a good game. But the third quarter, I thought Alabama was dominating. And then all of a sudden in that fourth quarter, they let them come right down the field, score, 75-yard play to tie up the game, or 75-yard drive to tie up the game. That was, to me, as soon as that happened, game over. I was like, Alabama's not going to win this in overtime.
Well, and that goes to the point you made earlier about elite coaching for the teams that are in the title right now. Because when I said, oh, this championship feels more accessible, it's the same way that people used to say, oh, well, Steph Curry, he's a more relatable superstar because I can get like him. Like, no, you can't. He's still the 1% of the 1%, just like these teams are. And even if there are a few more 3-star bodies on the field, you're absolutely right. The story of this game, whether it was on the defensive side of the football, everything that they were able to do. When you look, 5 sacks against Alabama in the first half that everybody saw, none of them were on the same look, and only 2 of them in my mind were like guys physically winning. The other 3 were they forced Alabama's offensive line to make mental mistakes. They presented so many looks on that side of the ball, and Jesse Minter, their defensive coordinator, does such a good job, like a very NFL-esque, they get the Baltimore Ravens comps a lot because of the connective tissue coaching-wise between the two. They made it hell for them on that side. And then Sharon Moore on the other side, that play you're talking about, they had taken advantage of Alabama in man coverage situations all day long and put them in a bind. And they had not only the right call for that moment, but just in general, something we had seen even in the games where Jim Harbaugh was suspended was they had the gumption, the belief, and the plan to go for it in those situations. They were never deterred or afraid of the moment in the regular season. And so it wasn't surprising that with the game on the line, everybody involved was comfortable enough to make that call. And that's a very big deal.
Yeah, I think the flip side of that, too, is the end of what happened in the Sugar Bowl, where you had a situation where Washington needs a first down and they can essentially ice the game. And Kalen DeBoer decides, instead of taking a knee, and maybe there's I think there would have been 15 seconds or something like that on the clock for Texas to have to go back down the rest of the field. He tries to go for it. Their running back gets hurt, although it sounds like he is going to play in the national championship game,
Yeah.
which is huge because he's been a huge part of their success later on in the season, as we've talked about on the show. But he made the aggressive call to try to go for it and get the first down. It didn't work because I don't think he expected his running back to get hurt and to stop the clock. But those are the kind of coaching decisions. I don't know if you call them aggressive. I think it's just kind of smart that end up benefiting both of those coaches and winning those really close games. And Texas was just not able to make that final play the way Alabama wasn't able to make the final play. And we ended up with probably two of the most exciting college football playoff games back to back because of it.
I think, too, you mentioning the coaching part with Kalen DeBoer down the stretch. Think about another high leverage moments. Winning the Apple Cup, that reverse handoff or reverse end around to Roma Dunze on 4th down, backed up to let it go. They're all willing to let it fly. That play by Kalen DeBoer, by the way, that run on 3rd and 5, I know people saying kneel it. You would still have to have had some form of a punt return on that play, which is a risk, and then 15 seconds left on it versus, hey, if you pop a 5-yard run, the game is over. So I can actually understand that versus everyone running to the Mario Cristobal comparison at the end of the Georgia Tech game. But you are right overall in that I think both of these staffs give their team a decided advantage. Like Washington's got the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line, a bunch of NFL wide receivers, and a quarterback that's steadily climbing draft boards. And you can still point, kind of like we do with like the Shanahan stuff in the NFL, and say the system helps these guys all out a lot because of the play calling advantage they have with Ryan Grubb, especially on offense.
Yeah, I really, really, really love Michael Penix, and I have been like his biggest fan all season. So I'm super excited that we get to watch him play another game. Michigan is a 4-point favorite. Well, like I said, we'll do a little bit more national championship recap in a minute, but we need to go back to, I think, some of the more fun things from this postseason, Mike. And you were one of the pioneers in bowl game edible thing, product branding experiences in your ESPN career. So talk to me about your reaction in seeing the very macabre and disturbing fate of the Pop-Tart Bowl mascot in this postseason.
It was funny in talking about this in the lead up. I realized that in so many ways, I'm just biting swag from my dad on a lot of this stuff, but he actually was calling the Outback Bowl once years ago and had spent so much time on air eating a bloomin' onion they brought up to the booth that ESPN, like his bosses called him and they're like, all right, we can stop eating now. Like, we don't have to keep doing this. So
but he was like, I'm hungry. This is not like a bit.
Yeah, you put a bloomin' onion in front of me and expect me not to destroy. I don't know what you think this is. So to take the through line from that through the Mayo Bowl experience that me and Nish and Taylor had, and now to this, I was proud. Like, and to hear them call out the Duke's Mayo Bowl by name, now the brands are getting competitive and the bowls are getting competitive. And it netted us a freaking Pop-Tart that sacrificed itself on the altar before everyone. Like, we had a Pop-Tart Christ figure in bowl season. This is my body, which will be given up for you, happened in front of the national audience. And then we watched Kansas State tear him limb from limb.
I'm just afraid, like, what's next? Where do we go for every year? The brands just get more and more absurd. Like, how do we top this now?
So I think there's a couple ways. One, and unsurprisingly, most of them involve Taylor Swift in my mind. One idea I had for the Mayo Bowl, Travis and Jason Kelsey went on their podcast recently and tried to claim that the mayo dumped on the winning coach didn't look like mayo because the viscosity was a little bit messed up. I think some of this ends with Cincinnati playing in the Mayo Bowl somehow next year and Jason and Travis Kelsey showing up as the mayo dumpers. The other thing I think is you just add, well, for the Pop-Tart, the directive is clear because the one complaint people had was you didn't actually eat the live mascot. You had to do the transubstantiation thing. So I think they've got to spend all their time, tech, and budget next year on actually making a mascot suit someone can wear that the players can actually gnaw on.
That is kind of what I was expecting. And also, when you're talking about the Outback Bowl and the Bloomin' Onion, I always think of Ryan Nanny in the Bloomin' Onion costume. If you're not familiar, please Google it. It was, I was working for Ryan when that happened, and I was home for Christmas. And I turned on the TV and I was like, that's my boss. And my parents, who already don't understand, or at least at the time didn't understand what my job was, were like, what? That was a weird New Year's Day. It was hard to explain.
It's hard enough to try and convince your parents like working in sports or working as a blogger or something is real. And then when your boss is now edible, I'd imagine, yeah, that does get a lot more dicey.
They were like, wow, that's really weird. Also, great calves that Ryan Nanny looks great in that costume. Anywho, shout out Ryan. I have another hot take for you, Mike, which is about the Orange Bowl. I don't really care that it was a blowout. I don't really think that it means anything. What say you?
I would tend to agree. Like I understand Kirby's in his Nick Saban era now, where because he's the big bad at the top of the sport more often than not, he now is going to take the opportunity to have the microphone and say the things because that's what Nick did. But I'm with you. I thought the appeal of college football was always that we can buy in bulk, like it's a Costco run. During the regular season, we got 133 teams or whatever it is. And so if one game's bad, you move on to the next. You've got one every night of the week towards the end of the year. And in bowl season, if one bowl game is bad, well, don't worry. Another one either kicks off later that afternoon or at noon the next day. So I get that it's supposed to be one of the prestige games, but in this day and age, all politics are going to be local. Like every team situation is going to be hyper specific. Our game, the Notre Dame game in El Paso was a perfect example of that. Both teams had dealt with some transition, but because enough of Notre Dame's key players were coming back and because there was so much coaching staff continuity versus what you had for Oregon State for obvious reasons once their head coach left, they were going to be vastly different results, and you kind of understood why it happened.
Yeah, for me, like when I see a team like Georgia win that game, and it was a just massive blowout. Was it 65-3 was the final? I mean, it was incredibly lopsided, to say the least. My mindset is for the winning team, like, oh wow, good for them. Like that's a great way to end your season. For the losing team, I'm just like, okay, like I don't really have any sort of like valuable takeaway from that because there were so many reasons why Florida State had the opt-outs that they had, and Georgia had opt-outs too, but you just can't compare like, oh, well, 30 opt-outs here equals 30 opt-outs there. Like, of course not. It matters what position and the depth and everything else, how many practices you get as a starter and all of these other things. It just is like completely impossible to compare one to another.
Trying to, like, the people that wanted to use that as like, oh, see, Florida State never should have been in the CFP. I'm like, that's not how this works. Please don't.
No, I don't think that's like a genuine argument. I think that a lot of people, I don't know, maybe some people do genuinely believe that. That's fine. I mean, the college football playoff games were great. I don't even think it's worth like even continuing to argue about it. But yeah, it's okay that sometimes some of the New Year's Six games aren't ultra competitive. I think we had enough really fun games. Bowl season's a mixed bag. I think you get rewarded for tuning into all of the games and accidentally getting a famous toastery bowl when you're not expecting it. That's kind of the beauty of it. And 5 million people almost tuned in for the Pop-Tart Bowl between two teams that I don't think anyone will remember played in the Pop-Tart Bowl in a year. So that's great.
That's a great call, Jess, is we need to consider it in totality. like I always make playing blackjack with a table full of people sucks because you're just basically handing money from one of your friends to the other. None of you actually come out on top in the end. And that's kind of like this bowl season, because think about how many years we've had terrible CFP semifinal games. We just outsourced that to a bowl game that wasn't a CFP game now in exchange for really good semifinal games. That seems like a pretty fair trade-off for all of us.
And also, it's just going to change. It's going to change next year. There's 12 teams in the playoffs. And the thing that I love, which I have heard from probably like every program that missed out on the playoff or was in that like 9-3, 8-4, 10-2 range this season, was like, well, next year it's a pass-fail grade. Basically, you make the playoff and you pass, you don't, and you fail. And there's like probably, I want to say like 35 plus programs that have that mindset going into next year. And so for anyone who thinks that the 12-team playoff is going to devalue the regular season, I think especially because it's the first year, coaches are really, really, really going to have the pressure on to make it.
I do wonder if, because a lot of people have brought this up, because more teams make the playoffs, I wonder if that's going to help coaching longevity in certain jobs, where before, if you were Michigan and Ohio State and you missed the CFP for 3 years in the 4-team version because you lose to the other one, you're on the hot seat immediately after 3 years. Now, if you're making it every year and you have another chance to do that, great. But I do wonder how this affects coaches down in that like 15 to 20 range, where maybe your job would have been pretty safe before because expectations were guarded, but now the expectations got ramped up. And I wonder if some of those schools are going to become a little bit less patient.
I do love, that's a great take. I would love to do like a little infographic tracker on coaching hot seat situations for coaches that make the 12-team playoff, especially in the first year, because I think a lot of teams, it's been a small group of teams that have made the 4-team playoff. And if you're one of them, you are very special. and you are very, very good. You did a good job. And now that's going to expand, and I think everyone wants to be part of that select few very special programs that have made it, especially the programs that have made it twice. So let's pivot ahead to the national championship game on Monday in Houston. Here's another hot take. I've seen a lot of the Rose Bowl should be the national championship game takes over the last week, Mike. Not sure if I'm sold on that. However, I would like to see more of a college environment in the national championship game. I hate that it's on a Monday. It's going to be super late. I'm going to be in my jammies again on the couch. But I am looking forward to it. And I am very excited to watch Michigan and Washington play each other because guess what? They get to play each other again in the Big Ten next year. So this is going to probably be the start of a little bit of a rivalry, I think. So who you got in this one?
I'm picking Washington in this one, and I think some of that's caked in the recency bias of just watching the way offense looked in the Michigan-Bama game and then watching against a Texas defense that's not certainly as good as Michigan, but has a lot of, big bodies up front, a lot of similar things that they did to have success that I think Michigan can replicate. And just seeing the way that Michael Penix Jr. played, like if Michael Penix Jr. can muster another game like that, they're going to win because I don't know if Michigan's built to win a shootout like that. But yeah, I'm going to pick Washington to win. I'm going to say that same combination of things that worked for them, including Penix's ability to evade pressure, gets it done. And then their defense has to make just enough plays against the Michigan offense that we know, especially we saw at the end when it was nut cutting time, they wanted the ball on the ground. JJ McCarthy made a couple of big throws, but that's always kind of been the formula. And so Washington made enough plays against Sark's group. I think they can do it again here.
I love nut cutting time. Tell me more about that next time we do this segment together. I feel like I'm going to take the opposite approach of you just based on vibes. Not like that Washington has bad vibes, but just because I thought Michigan going into this game after the entire season where they've been like, oh, it's the world against us. Like they have this chip on their shoulder. This could be Jim Harbaugh's last game. It sounds like he has serious NFL aspirations. Reese Davis said on the LeBatard Show this week, he thought, it's looking like, he might be gone next year. So I don't think that necessarily they have like any sort of talent advantage over Washington or they're more physical than Washington even, although they certainly looked like a very physical team against Alabama. And I love Washington. I have enjoyed them this entire season. I think that they have some of the most special wide receiver skill position guys in all of college football this year, and it shows. They've won 14 games in a row. But I don't know. I just feel like the scales are tipping towards Michigan right now for me, and all it takes is for some of those like long Michigan just hand off the ball 40-time drives, and that's all. That's game.
I think you're right. And I saw Parker Fleming, Stats of War on Twitter, say this before, that he feels like there's more ways Michigan can win this game than there are Washington can win this game. I think he's right. Michigan is the more complete team, especially because of what they are and what they represent defensively. Like, I'm so excited about Washington and a very NFL style. Like, it's Washington's offense versus Michigan's defense is like college football's version this year of when the 49ers played the Ravens. Like, scheme, quality of players, all that stuff's great. But the other side is, on paper, advantage Michigan in a pretty big way with their offense, what they can do on the ground versus a Washington defense that's been timely but never consistent.
Yeah, and I think despite what I just said, Washington's offense keeps them in the game no matter what the margins are, right? Because if you watched Michael Penix throw those absolute dimes in the Sugar Bowl, all it takes is one of those, right, to break open a defense and score 6 points. So I'm hoping it's a good game. I hope it's a close game. I hope it's a fun game. I would hate for such a fun college football semifinal day to be followed up by another national championship blowout like we had last year. But right now, giving the edge to Michigan.
Man, does that hurt you to say? Like, I don't know what your relationship with Michigan is as like a Notre Dame fan.
Despise them. This is me giving an emotional hedge. I'm going to accept the worst case scenario, and then if it happens, I accepted it. It's already, the hatred is coursing through my veins already, and it can't hurt me. And if I put all my hope in Washington and then they lose, it's gonna crush me, Mike. So this
there
is
we
me
go.
giving Michigan their flowers.
This is the, again, your ever-present reminder. Sports fandom is a mistake. It's a sickness that we all willingly allowed into our body, and we're worse for it.
I'm disgusting. But anywho, that's our episode of Gen CFB. I hope people have enjoyed it. Lucy should be back next week, I hope. Right, Taylor?
Yep, I believe so.
I'm pissed. I thought this was Foot Girls. I came prepared.
Oh, God. Put that.
I was ready to do the damn thing.
What's on the side of your foot? Is that a callus?
I think it's a callus. Yeah, I've been putting in work lately.
Welcome to the Foot Fam.
No, there's no foot fam.
Foot people. We are foot people out here. Let's go.
You're not invited back on.
I'm sorry.